Welcome back. Today we're going to be answering a question. How do you get the impossible to sell listing sold? The title of today's podcast is From Stale to Sold, the proven method to sell the impossible listing. And yes, we're talking to all of you with listings who are sitting on, and your listings are sitting on the market too long. But this is also fantastic information to use when you're going after expired sellers, when you're actually meeting with expired listings and you show them the fact that you are an expert when it comes to, selling the impossible listing.
Yes, that's right. So just to reiterate what you just said, you can really use this three ways. Number one, if you're sitting on a listing yourself, you've already got it in your inventory, it's not selling right away. Number two, use what we're going to teach you on today's podcast to prevent yourself from getting an expired. And number three, when you're actually going after expireds of someone else's, that you want to turn that from a stale listing to a sold listing yourself. So those are three ways you can use the same things that we're teaching you today.
And Julie did warn me there's a lot of content today's podcast, and we're probably not going to be able to get through all of it on today's show. You're going to want the notes, the easiest way, and frankly, the least expensive way, because it costs you nothing to get all of our notes from the show today, or any of the past 5,000 plus past podcasts, is just go to harrisrealestatedaily.com. harrisrealestatedaily.com is our, daily newsletter that we send to all of the subscribers. And the best part is it costs you nothing. So go ahead and subscribe to harrisrealestatedaily.com. You can just go there direct, or you can click the link, which is in the show description below. If you're over on YouTube, it's there as well. Just drop in your email, and after that, there's really nothing to do other than just sit back, relax, and wait for the newsletter to show up with all of our day's notes. Now, what you should do with these notes is you should use these for social media posts. You should definitely be gearing up towards creating a campaign for attracting expired sellers. And here's what, again, we'll suggest you do. Combine passive with proactive lead generation. So do call the expireds, do proactively go after them, but then passively market to them as well on social media, and use the content from today's podcast and a lot of other previous podcasts to educate the seller on why you're an expert at getting the impossible to sell listing sold.
Very good. So first, we're going to start with a secret. There is no magical marketing plan, idea, campaign, or video that will get an overpriced, tough-to-sell listing sold. Stop looking for one miracle and sharpen your skills instead. The object is to be the listing agent at the time that it actually sells.
Now write this down. There's a script that we teach in Premier Coaching, and it's when contacting sellers. And it's very simple. Mr. Seller, sometimes the best homes don't sell, and it's probably not the reason you've been told. Now, that's that's a script you'd have, or something you'd say to a seller when you're in the very beginning stages of getting to know them. But the point is that this previous agent has probably just been telling them that it's price, price, price. I'm here to tell you price is usually the culprit for an unsold listing, but it's not always the reason. So don't have a mindset towards expired listings, or even listings that you personally might have, that it's just price. Because I'll tell you guys a true story, and this happened to Julie and I dozens and dozens of times in our real estate career. We absolutely were expired hunters, and we knew that for the most part, a lot of our competitors in the same market that we were working weren't going after expireds because they had a bad mindset about them. Oh, the market passed them up. I don't want to take somebody's listing, all these things.
Or if somebody else couldn't sell it, what makes me think I could sell it?
Or even better, if, essentially we'd take a expired listing and the previous listing agent would sometimes get a little, stuffy with it and say just what Julie just said. I mean, all these things. You have to work past your competitors' mindset issues with regards to expired listings. But here's what we often have discovered. Julie and I would list an expired listing at the same price, new pictures, new description, and it would sell the next day. Now, why did it happen that way? Because there's some flaws, let's just use a word, in the MLS that allows the searches to essentially almost suppress exactly a listing, a home for sale that's been for sale for more than like a month, and all the new feeds. So what happens is when you put a listing for sale, the reason you get a big boost in showings is because the market's excited, buyers are excited, the the buyer's agents are excited. Everyone wants to know about the new listing. But as soon as it's been for sale for a week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, whatever, in your market, it might be 3 months. As soon as it starts passing these sort of, I think milestones for how long a listing should take to sell, then people start making up reasons why it didn't sell. Mm-hmm. People, it stops getting searched in the MLS. Buyers start, that house would have sold. There must be problems with it. It's kind of like, milk that's in a cooler. And I used to tell this story to sellers that, Mr. Seller, the fact is that the longer the milk sits in the cooler, the closer you come to that expiration date, the less desirable it is. I mean, the first thing that people do when they go and look for milk in the cooler is they're looking for the one that has essentially is the newest gallon of milk, because they don't want to get the milk that other people have already passed up on. And there are lots of scripts in Premier Coaching that make the point. But moral of the story is, be careful that you do not approach your listings and maybe future listings that you're going to be attracting that are expired because the other agent couldn't get them sold. Don't approach them with the only problem being the price, because it could have been, again, the market timing, the interest rates. It could have been the seller's level of cooperation. It could have been the seller's level of motivation, maybe not allowing enough showings. It could have been that it's a kind of an odd property and the previous listing agent never returned any calls to any, buyers, let alone buyers agents that had questions. All these things.
It could be more than one thing too.
Right. But price is usually the top three things that's wrong with the property, but it's not the only thing. And if everybody else is telling that seller price and you say, Mr. Seller, sometimes the best homes don't sell, and it's probably for not the reasons you've been told. You say something along those lines and you're going to open up a conversation because they don't want to hear their house is overpriced any more than you really want to tell them.
Yeah, that's right. And that is a very common thing that expired sellers will say to their future listing agents once it's expired. They will say the only time, if they heard from their agent at all, they'll say the only time I ever heard, all they wanted to talk about is price. They didn't tell. I had this exact case come up on a coaching call, I think about 2 weeks ago. They said that I rarely heard from my listing agent, but when I did, they only wanted to pound me on price. I never had any idea what they were actually doing to market the property because they didn't show me any evidence of that. I felt like they dropped the ball and I didn't know what to say. So that was a lack of communication. It might have been a price issue, probably a lack of marketing, could have been a crappy MLS description. It could have been all those things, but the seller's impression was the only thing the agent had in their wheelhouse was asking me to reduce the price, and that's a great way to get yourself fired.
Now, we're sharing all this with you so that you can use this information to make sure you get your hard-to-sell listings sold, but also when you're approaching expired listings, you also have more information in your mind to make you even more powerful, because we've got great news for you. Probably one of the best times in a long time to go after expired listings is almost here. You're going to see so many great listings that are going to start to expire into the new year, because that happens every year. And they're going to be withdrawn. And the sellers are going to be, taking them off the market, planning on putting them back for sale. You can, provided your MLS allows for it, you can actually directly solicit those potential sellers. And a lot of them won't want to have their house for sale in the spring. They want to sell it now. And all these types of things, all these types of conversations, that this information is going to make you more confident when approaching those sellers. So, Julie, if you're a listing agent, and you have a tough to sell listing, let's go through what our actual plan of action is.
It is a plan of action, and it is a system. So we're going to start first by reviewing the facts of your subject property and your seller's situation. So number one, you're going to do a new comparative market analysis, a new CMA. You now know the house better. You've probably shown it yourself. You've had some feedback. Since you've been listed, there have been some new sales, some pending sales, and some new actives that you now have to compete with that you didn't before. So pretend it's a new listing. Where would you price it today? And consider the following: the absorption rate. That's how many houses that are like your subject property that are actually selling per month.
Well, let's give them the script for that. So let's say there's 20 houses for sale that are hypothetical competitors for that house. Similar enough in age, bedrooms, bathrooms, the whole thing, right? And so what you're going to do is you're going to show the seller all the competing houses. I know they're not the same. And if you've got an analytical seller, they're going to tell you all the reasons why their house is better. That's normal. Just assume they're going to behave that way. Don't put yourself in a position to argue with them about their opinion. You will lose every single time. But just show them all the homes that are currently for sale and explain to them that for the most part, the buyers are going to see all of them being more or less the same square footage, bedrooms, bathrooms. You guys get the idea. But then what I want you to do is organize all the houses in the order of price. And I want you to then explain to them that generally speaking, the homes that sell the quickest, because there's a lot of competing homes, are going to be the ones that are essentially positioned on the market to correctly reflect the buyer's expectations. That is a clever way of saying the price, condition, and location is all in alignment to the point where it makes the house more desirable than the other homes, right? You guys conceptually understanding what I'm getting at here? And then you can show them the list of the last 20 homes that were similar, again, good comps of sold homes. And then I want you to point out the fact that the ones that had the least amount of days in the market, the ones that sold for the closest to asking price, if not over, were all the ones that had those three variables. Frankly, they were usually the best price, condition, and location. Thus, they sold faster, usually for asking, if not over asking. Let the seller see the information, and you will very quickly see that even the most dug-in seller is going to realize that, homes sell quicker when they are priced correctly. And again, don't say, here's another advanced coaching tip for you. Never tell a seller, lower the price. Saying to the seller, lowering the price is similar to us telling Zoe to do her homework.
Hateful words.
Right?
Them's fighting words.
Them are fighting words. So definitely want to keep that in mind. It's reposition the house, Mr. Seller. We have to reposition the house on the market so that it correctly reflects the market's expectations. And the market, based on what we're seeing selling, is expecting homes similar to yours to be in this price range. Let the seller see the facts, but don't say lower the price. I'm telling you that will build. If you don't get fired for saying it, what's going to happen is they're going to build up resentment. And they will, again, you will experience this. If you've been in the real estate industry for a long time, you already have experienced this. You'll pick up an expired listing and the seller is motivated and the seller is, going to be willing to reposition the house correctly, even fix up some things that maybe needed to be fixed up in the first place. They would have happily done that for the first listing agent, but they didn't because they built resentments up towards that listing agent. And they'll tell you that.
Yeah, so they will tell you that. We heard that quite a bit.
We did. They'll say, listen, I know I need to, paint the walls, and I know I need to lower the price or whatever it is and fix this. And, I just didn't want to do it for the previous agent because I didn't want them to get the sale. You will hear sellers say that because the previous listing agent didn't communicate enough with them. That's the number one reason. Number two is because they had no bedside manner. They said, lower the price, and they were too gruff. They lost the listing. The seller made it so that they weren't going to win from selling the house and getting paid. That's the type of psychology sometimes you're going to be dealing with some of your sellers or your future sellers.
That's right. So you're going to, again, we're doing a new CMA. We talked about absorption rate. You're going to look at what the days on the market are now for similar homes. You're going to look at the list to sell price ratio. That's the difference between the listing price and what homes that actually closed sold for, and the number of homes that you are now competing against. I did this analysis with one of my coaching clients last week. We looked at all of these things. We looked at while they were on the market. I think it had reached about, I believe it was 68 days on the market, slow to no showings. What was the deal with this? Well, what else did sell? 2 houses in the very same neighborhood had sold recently. And what did we discover? This client lives in Southern California. The ones that sold did have pools. The ones that did not have pools, okay? And they were all basically priced the same. So what does that show you? For the same price, the buyers in Southern California pretty much expect to have a pool and not be on the line to spend another $100,000 to add a pool after they paid the same price as a house that's got one, right? That's
right.
The kind of thing that you find.
And deliver this information as analytically and as dry as you can,
Yes.
without pretense, without emotion, without bloviating, without an opinion. Just give them the facts and let frankly,
and just say, what do you think about that?
Exactly. What do you think about that? And just don't try to make it so that you're trying to coerce them into thinking one way or the other. Let them form their own opinions based on the facts, and they will indeed form their own opinions. Now, number two is, frankly, should have been number one, absolutely positively the most important thing.
Review your seller's motivation. Even if you believe that you knew it when you took the listing, you probably did, but it could have changed. Why are they moving? Are they a have-to-sell seller or just a want-to-move seller?
In other words, is something compelling? Is the option of keeping the house, of not selling the house, something that's going to cause them far more discomfort than if they were to keep it? In other words, they don't want to have 2 mortgages. They have to sell because there's a legal reason. They have to sell because there's a financial reason.
That's
They
right.
have to sell because they're relocating someplace, where they don't want to own 2 homes. All the most motivated sellers are going to be the ones that are going to be most cooperative when it comes to positioning the house on the market. But you got to find out if they're have to sell sellers or if they're want to sell sellers. If you find out they're want to sell as well, when pigs fly, or if I can get my price, I have no place to go. Well, I'll decide where I'm going to go next once this property sells. Those types of things. The less motivated sellers are less likely to sell because they're not going to be willing to position the house correctly on the market. That's the nature of lack of motivation.
And again, that's not just price, although it can be price. Lack of cooperation can be, having all kinds of crazy showing rules. It could be not taking after the house before showings. It could be hanging around and creeping out the buyers when they are showing. Lots of different flavors of that. So this is really important. I'm always shocked how many coaching clients that I train help with this situation don't know this answer. Where is the seller going when the house sells? Well, I don't know. I don't remember. I think they're going to their rental property. I don't know.
You're being too nice.
Right?
The fact is that most agents don't know how to pre-qualify.
Well, that's what it comes down to. They
Yes.
don't know it because they didn't ask the pre-qualification questions. Have they already moved out? Remember, the motivation may have changed since you first listed the home. And note to self, this could be the very issue if they're buying with you and don't have a good feel for where they're going to be moving. Why would they give you a better price? Why would they cooperate more if they don't know where they'd even move to? Uncertainty causes people to not take action. And in this case, it could be, not changing the price, not correcting negative feedback. So here's a solution in that situation. Take them out for a long afternoon or even a full day to see what their options are. They need to fall in love with what's next to let go of what's current. And here's the secret. Oftentimes, new construction is the answer. Be sure that you know what's being built where and at what price points in your market. Learn the builder incentives. This may require you to go out for a day and investigate the options before you take your seller/buyer out.
But it also, Julie said something really critical. Hopefully you guys were listening, is that even though their motivation may have been because they had a home that they were building, and you haven't checked in with them about that motivation. And guess what? They decided not to go with that builder, and now they have no place to go. And that's the reason they're being so fussy with allowing showings. Mm-hmm. So it's a good idea to review what the seller's time frame is and what their motivation is. If you know for sure that the new house is going to be done in, say, 6 months, and you then have something to work backwards from, and you can gauge the seller's, frankly, if the seller's being a little bit stubborn on showings or price even, you can go after the seller and remind them what their time frame is. Remind them that's your job to be the planner of, to avoid the things that might cause them to end up owning 2 homes at once. You have to be in control of that. But just remind them, Mr. Seller, remind me, is the house, I have in my notes that your new construction home is going to be done in like 3 months. Is that true? Yes. Well, that's right. So can I tell you why that scares me for you? Why? Well, it's because in this market, as you know, it's going to take usually once we find a buyer. So let's say we find a buyer today, we're in contract in a couple days. It's going to take 30 to 60 days to even get the home sold. And that's assuming there's, we find the buyer today and there's no complications with their financing or any other things. So if you're telling me we have roughly 90 days to actually, make it so that you're not owning 2 homes at once, we don't have really that much time, effective time left to really get this property sold so you're not ending up, again, owning 2 homes at once. Work backwards from what their motivation is, and then you'll get them, again, to move past their emotional resistance sometimes to doing things that maybe make them uncomfortable, like, not allowing the comfort sheep or goat, or what was the seller we had with it?
Comfort pony.
A comfort pony in the house. Like, oh my gosh.
Shows like a zoo. That
Yes,
was the feedback.
smells like a zoo. Right.
Yes.
It was your coaching client, right?
It was also, again, in California.
Yeah.
Yes. Now, here's another interesting thing with this scenario. When you find out that your seller is building, and I dealt with this with a coaching client last week, a lot of these guys don't realize this because things had been selling so much more quickly when we didn't have inventory. Many of the builders, and you need to know, if you've got a client that's in contract on new construction and you've got their listing, they've got a house to sell, okay, or maybe even if somebody else has it listed in another state, you need to know, does that builder have a requirement to remove the home sale contingency by a certain date? That's another way to show you've got to get serious about getting this house sold, because in 30 days, maybe it's not a completed house until 90 or 120, but in only 30 days, that seller is going to have to remove their home sale contingency and proceed to close, having 2 mortgages, assuming they even qualify. Or guess what happens to them? That house goes back into inventory, the builder sells it, and they have to start from scratch. That's motivational.
And but any changes they made, they'll lose their deposits.
That's right.
And they probably paid for that weird tile that they wanted in the bathroom that wasn't on the normal pick list. Yeah, exactly. That's going to be money that they're going to lose. Anyway, motivation.
Yes, motivation.
Point number 3 is keeping the home an option for the seller. These are all questions you should have known, by the way, the answers to when you listed the house originally. It is in the seller pre-qualification form that we give you as part of Premier Coaching. After you set the appointment in our 7-step listing process, then you've got to go and pre-qualify the seller, ask them all the questions, because you got to know what their motivations are. Because here's the bottom line. If they might have you put the house for sale, all the while in their back of their mind, they're planning on making it into a VRBO, or they're planning on leasing it. How many of you listening right now have had that actually happen? It's painful, isn't it?
Well, and let's talk about that, because that's happening more frequently due to low interest rates being locked in,
Yep.
right? Okay, so is keeping the home an option for your seller? Might they lease it? Do they want to try to lease it? You always say yes to leasing it, even if leasing isn't your thing. Get help with that.
What is Julie saying? So if you are finding out that they are deciding to lease it, And let's go to the very beginning stages of your conversation with your seller. And they did say that they'd consider leasing it. You rookie mistake. I don't do leases. Well, you're not going to get the listing either. So what you do is you take the house as a listing, and then you also offer it for lease. And you explain to the seller whichever way it goes first, whichever numbers make the most sense is the direction that will go. And then you do handle the lease up. If you don't want to handle the management, that's fine. Find a property manager that'll do it. But you can handle the lease up, and you can at least get paid, usually a 6% commission on the lease up. And then if it sells faster, you get it that way. But you say yes to everything, even if they're thinking about leasing it. But again, the rookie mistake is you take the listing, never having asked if they're considering leasing it, and then finding out that, hey, guess what? The seller's super uncooperative. I wonder why that is. Because they already have a plan B, and it's called leasing the property.
Yes, exactly. Now, here's a secret. Once you discuss the reality of them being landlords, again, a discussion you won't have if you don't use the pre-qualification script, once you discuss what the amount probably will lease for, that's doing a CMA for the lease, and their net income monthly, they may change their mind about leasing it. If you haven't already, know how to research lease pricing, because it might be their backup plan without having any numbers behind it.
That's right. And, I'll suggest like Valerie Fitzgerald during the housing crash. I had her on our podcast, and she had all these really ultra high-end listings, and none of them were selling. She didn't want to lose the listings. The sellers pretty much all decided to lease the properties. Had she made the mistake of saying, I don't do property leases, she would have lost all of those, all that revenue from the leasing, but also she wouldn't have gotten the listings after those leases were up. And that's what happened.
Yep.
So she started offering leasing as an option for her potential sellers. The potential sellers then listed and leased in whichever way it went first. And if it went leased, then she, got the commission on the lease, and then she managed the property for them. I think she actually had a third-party management company that she worked with. But the clause of the agreement was when those sellers decided to no longer be landlords, those owners decided to no longer be landlords, that she'd get the listing again. Otherwise, she would have lost all that inventory. All those centers of influence relationships would have been lost as well.
Exactly. Okay, now, and this should be point number 4 that got edited. Okay, number 4, set up what we call lovingly the reality tour with yourself and your seller. This is after you've done all the steps we've talked about so far. Do your research first to know what you're going to show and how it impacts the subject property. Then take your seller or sellers out on a showing trip where you'll see what they're actually competing against and what's currently pending. Don't overcoach them, show the properties, and ask what their thoughts are. Every time we've had coaching clients do this, where the sellers have taken notes, they have come back and said, gosh, I didn't realize how outdated my house is actually looking. I didn't realize the impact of having a pool in the backyard, all of that kind of thing.
Here's how you balance that out. Now, this is going to be especially true for semi-custom or full custom homes. They're not going to realize, to Julie's point, that they're essentially the style of the home, this, that, or the other. The kitchens, bathrooms, floor plan is kind of outdated. It's not in alignment with the buyer's expectations. If you're blessed with new construction nearby, make sure you not only show them the resale competing homes, but show them the new construction competing homes, because the new construction will really drive the point home that their home is obsolete in the eyes of the buyers, and they're going to have to price accordingly. Guys, get it?
Yeah. Even if, their house is 20 years old and what's selling is 3 years old, it doesn't have to be brand new construction. It's just a more modern floor plan that doesn't have all the repair problems.
I'm going to give you guys an advanced coaching tip. When you go on a really expensive listing, or the seller's really fussy, or you show up and they have their own spreadsheets and their own CMAs, like you'll run into those types. Here's what you do. And let's just say whatever they came up with, is not in alignment with the market's expectations. Notice how I'm not saying lower the price. Offer to say, Mr. Seller, I can understand, having now seen your home, why you feel your home is worth more than what the market is telling us. Not your CMA, nothing like that. Remember, you're supposed to be on the same side of the seller. You're not. It's you against the market kind of thing. So let's do this so that we can show the market that the price makes sense. Let's hire an appraiser. And the appraiser will have an independent appraiser come out. You can even choose the appraiser. And they'll come out and they'll appraise the home. And that way, when the buyer comes by with the buyer's agent, that we can leave the appraisal on the kitchen counter, and they'll actually feel more comfortable offering the price that you feel it's worth, because the appraisal hopefully will be in alignment with what your expectations are. And again, that'll save us the effort of having to even maybe worrying about negotiating, because after all, why would you sell it for less than the appraisal price? And Julie and I offered this. We've had droves of our coaching clients over the years offered this to the usually upper end fussy seller. And I cannot off the top of my head think of a single time the seller, through our personal experience or our coaching's experience, actually chose to have the house appraised because that cut through their own egos and bullshit
Right.
about the fact that they were overpricing the house.
Exactly. Like, why wouldn't you want it to have it appraised, right?
Exactly. They just wanted to argue and be right.
Exactly.
And if you argue against them and say my CMA and you try to make them wrong about price, you will not get the listing. Or if you have the listing,
You won't keep it.
You won't keep it. So use the appraisal. Have that as in your back pocket. And then what you can say is, Mr. Seller, I'll reimburse you at closing for the cost of the appraisal. I don't want to pay for the appraisal. What is that? Like $1,000? Like $400. But say, Mr. Seller, listen, that's fine. Here's what I'll do. I'll reimburse you for half the cost of the appraisal or the cost of the appraisal at closing. In other words, the house has to close. You have to be getting paid. And then, since the appraisal, you guys get it. That's the way you go about doing that. And again, that'll cut through even the most butt-headed seller about price.
Yes, that's right. And by the way, guys, all of these discussions go so much more smoothly when the seller has been hearing from you regularly.
Yeah.
One of the things that you get in Premier Coaching is your 12-week communication plan. I know some of you are having heart attacks. 12 weeks? I got to talk to somebody for 12 weeks? I've never talked to a seller for more than 12 days or 12 seconds. Well, this is a result of what you've all been collectively wishing for the past 5 to 7 years, and that's called more inventory and longer days on the market. If you're only talking to your seller when you're talking about price, again, you're not going to have a very good relationship with them. When instead they've heard from you for 3 weeks in a row, you've done 2 open houses, you've given the feedback, you've talked to them about correcting maybe some negative, showing feedback, and then you discuss price, they're going to be much more open to it.
And of course, what do you do now? You go to Premier Coaching. If you're not a Premier Coaching client, go to premiercoaching.com or text the word Premier to 47372. When you text the word Premier to 47372, we'll text you back a link to join Premier Coaching, and you can join for the first month for free. But you also get the first month for free if you just go directly to premiercoaching.com. And yes, that does include our daily semi-private coaching call. Everything that you're learning on this podcast is limited to what we can, stuff down your ears in 30 minutes. And this is just training. This is not coaching. I realize a lot of you, especially agents that have been in the business for a while, you conflate the two. Coaching and training are completely different things. This is the #1 daily listen to podcast for real estate agents because we do a great job on the podcast of training. Imagine the experience you're going to have as a Premier Coaching client when you're attending the daily semi-private coaching calls. So you're going to learn not just these overview of the topics, you're going to learn what to say, how to say it. You're going to feel comfortable and confident knowing how to approach even the most grumpiest seller about getting their house repositioned in the market. And then you can use that experience to start approaching expired listings. And you can maybe even carve out a little niche in your marketplace as the agent who you call in to sell the impossible listing. That in some markets is going to be literally like printing your own money. So go to premiercoaching.com or text the word Premier to 47372.
All right, point number 5, discuss with the seller that, and this is what they will say to you, quote, taking it off the market and trying it again next quarter, next year, next season is not always the best plan. When do you typically have the most competition in your market? For most of you, it's in the spring. Many tough to sell listings will sell in the fourth quarter or first quarter when there is less competition. Relocating executives, for example, usually move during fourth quarter or first quarter. All right, so that one's easy to figure out. Point number 6, ask if they plan to relist it with someone new. This is when you're getting some kickback and you know it's about to expire. Just ask them if their plan is to relist it with someone new.
Well,
what's the first thing the new agent will ask them to do?
Well, let's frame that, right? So if you're literally a moment from losing the listing and you've been trying to get a new contract extension signed and they're unwilling to do it, and they're kind of being non-committal about what their plan B is. Their plan B is they're going to relist it with somebody else, and they've already found that new agent. That's just going to happen. And the reason that happens is A, you didn't get the property sold, but B, you've probably done a piss poor job communicating with them while you had the listing. You avoided the conversations. You weren't following the 12-week seller communication guide, and they don't want any part of you anymore because they feel like you basically abandoned them during the time of need when they're feeling the most stress. You won't keep the listing because you didn't deserve to keep the listing because you didn't sell it and you didn't earn the right to actually keep it beyond your original term date, right? So when you get there, you still try to retain that listing by asking the seller to maybe set aside so a little bit of their emotional disconnect they might have and ask them to review what Julie's presenting to you now.
Yeah, so what do you figure the first thing a new agent's going to ask you to do? Of course, they're going to ask for a new price. Now, why lose valuable marketing time with restaging new photos, new videos, and new media when you can do this for them now? Okay, so if you're going to do all of that for a new agent, why not do it for me now? And again, they're not going to do it for you if this is the first time they've heard from you.
Now, I'm going to share with you something that doesn't work in all MLSs, but this is something that Julie and I used to do, and we have a lot of coaching clients. So Julie and I both had real estate licenses, and at the time we had a team of like 13 agents. And what we would do is, it was in our marketing plan, we present it to sellers. After one of our listings had been for sale for 30 days, we would withdraw the listing, and then we would relist the listing under a different license number. That would give the MLS, that would give it a new MLS listing. It would show up again as a new listing. We change the description, we change the pictures.
Resets the days on the market.
Exactly, resets the days on the market. Now, you can still do that in most markets, but it's not going to reset the days on the market. But that's not really what you're trying to target. What you're trying to target are all those buyers out there and buyers agents that are getting the new listings feed, because then you're going to get, they're being sent to their emails and whatnot. That's what's going to excite the market again, because it appears as a new listing. That'll get your showings to start again. And if you look at a bell curve of when showings happen, most showings and most of your best activity happens within the first really less than 30 days. Why? Because all the best buyers are in the marketplace right now, and they're waiting by their keyboards for a new listing to come up, and they're the ones that have already been pre-approved. Maybe they have lost in some competitive bidding situations. Maybe there's, maybe they, whatever, right? They're the ones in every marketplace, in every house, in every price range. There are going to be, it might be as few as 10, there might be as many as 100 buyers that are, waiting for the new listing to happen. And that means that the first showings you get are always your best showings. And interestingly enough, your first offers are almost always your best offers, because those are buyers and buyers agents that know the market really, really well, because they've been out there trying to find homes for those best, that first batch of buyers you're going to see. You need to know how to explain that to a seller using some of the graphs and the infographics we have in Premier Coaching.
Point number 7, review and use the NAR price reduction script, which we have taught for years, used ourselves, and works great. And Tim did a little bit of this at the top of the podcast. According to our National Association of Realtors, if after 2 weeks or 10 showings you don't have a workable offer, you are missing the market regarding price. Notice I did not say overpriced. I said missing the market regarding price. It's time to reposition the property to reflect the expectations of the buyers who are out there looking currently.
There's a lot of different ways to say that, but I'll tell you a clever way how to use this. First of all, you need to say that when you're meeting with the sellers in the first place, even when you feel like you're pricing it right. Price, condition, location are all in alignment. Always plant the seed with the seller that you're going to be reviewing the positioning of the home on the market. Avoid saying price in 2 weeks or 10 showings, whichever comes first. And write that down for them, and they have to acknowledge it. So you're listing it on October 1st. On October 10th, Mr. Seller, we're going to have a conversation about how the house is positioned in the market so we can make sure that you remain competitive, that sort of thing. Now, I'll give you guys another way of using it. Let's say you're in a situation where you have to take a listing overpriced. It happens, right? You have to. The other agents are blowing smoke up the seller's butt, or maybe the seller's blowing their own smoke about price. And here's what you say, Mr. Seller, listen, I appreciate the fact that despite what the market is telling us, you feel your house that is worth $500 is worth $525 or $530. Again, let's just assume other agents have told them that. So, Mr. Seller, I do understand, because you have a pool and the house is in really good condition. I can definitely see why your house would be worth more in the market. Don't argue with them about price. Don't try to make them wrong. You will be the one that loses. So let's do this. Let's go ahead and list the house now, Mr. Seller, at $529,900. But let's be in agreement that after 2 weeks or 10 showings, whichever comes first, we'll have a conversation about repositioning the house in the market so that correctly reflects the buyer's expectation. We don't want to miss the market, because we know the buyers that come in the first 2 or 3 weeks are the best buyers in the market. So let's do that. Let's go ahead and list this for $529,900, and I'll do everything to get the property sold. I totally and completely believe in the house. I love the improvements you've made, and then we'll revisit this if we have to in 2 weeks or 10 showings if we don't have the property sold. That is how you tell a seller what they want to hear, get the listing, and you're not doing battle with them and locking horns over price.
Yes, and do you remember we used to have sellers when we did that, and it's critical what you said, do it at the time you take the listing. Don't wait until it's time to ask for the price to come down. We actually had sellers call and say, well, we've made it to our 10th showing. I guess it's time to adjust the price. Don't pass out when that happens. Be happy and adjust the price. Okay, next we have point number 8. When you get your price adjustment, get an extension to your listing agreement simultaneously. It's way easier to sign all of those documents at once rather than having to have a second tough conversation to get the extension.
Now, the advanced coaching on that one is, and I know this is not going to be easy to do in this market, but if the market, frankly, if it becomes more challenging for sellers. In some markets, it's already happening. You want to get a price reduction form signed ahead of time. And you also basically, as Julie just said, in the price reduction form, you want to add an automatic extension to your listing time to get the property sold. But really, I'll tell you what the mastercraft move is. When you take a new listing, sign the contract for a year. Oh my gosh, no seller is going to sign that. Yes, they will, because if you're a Premier Coaching client, you're using what's called our easy exit listing, that if for any reason they're 100% satisfied with the services you're providing, that they can fire you with no strings attached. And again, you're not going to, when you present that to a seller, as we instruct you how to do so in Premier Coaching, that's going to be a USP for you, because that's going to make it so the seller always feels that they're in control. And, Mr. Seller, so given that, I'll put 10 years on this contract and it won't really matter, because if you're not satisfied with the services I'm providing. Now, what is the carve outs for that? They can cancel the listing anytime, but it has to give you like 48-hour notice or 5 days business notice or whatever it is. And any of the showings that came through the house with any of the buyers that came through they're excluded from the cancellation. So if, for example, the seller happened to have met one of the prospective buyers in the driveway and now they're scheming on some crafty way to cut out the agents, they're not going to be able to do that. We had that happen once, by the way, which is the reason we knew to write that as an exception to the easy exit listing. Yes. And again, this leaves the seller in control, but it also gives you more leverage because you're building trust in the front end. All sellers are going to always be jittery about losing control of, in general. So you're giving them back control if you use that as a USP. And that is included along with our complete seller pre-listing pack in Premier Coaching. You know what to do. Go to premiercoaching.com.
All right. Point number 9, help them correct all negative feedback. You may need to assist your homeowner in actually getting this done. So find service providers who agree to be paid out of proceeds at closing if the seller can't afford those repairs. Depends on what it is, how expensive it is. Otherwise, the price should be reduced. Oh, I used the word. The price should be adjusted to reflect the condition. This is usually lower than you think. Now, how low to go, that's a topic of discussion with your coach. It depends on what the issue is. In the case of the California thing, to put a pool in at that level of the house we were talking about is about $100,000. So it made sense, and we could prove that it should be adjusted by $100,000. This was a house that was over $1 million. So
that
correct.
is a cheap pool for $1 million house, just for the record.
Remember, it's California.
Oh, that's true.
What do you get for $1 million?
So $1 million house is like an 800 square foot house
with no air conditioning. Yeah, exactly.
Yep.
Okay. Point number 10: share what your new marketing plan is with your seller once the price has been improved and the listing has been extended. Also, share any negative feedback remedied. They absolutely will expect this from you. So those are 10 steps that you can take now.
All right. So you do not have all of our notes. Julie had a lot of extra content, but we're way over 30 minutes. And consider essentially what specifically should be in your plan, how to revise your plan, and a lot of other scripts. So our full outline, even though this is not in numerical sequence, my dear.
I got messed up when I sent it to you. Yeah.
I know. So no worries. But anyway, our full outline is available to newsletter subscribers. So your homework is to, yes, become a Premier Coaching client and also join our free newsletter. Go to harrisrealestatedaily.com and you can download these notes and use these as, social media sharing. Use these when you're talking to prospective sellers. Use these when talking to your existing sellers. All of these things. Use these when you're presenting to your agents in your team or your agents in your brokerage. Go to harrisrealestatedaily.com and subscribe to our daily newsletter. Guys, thank you for all the great feedback you've been giving us on iTunes, Stitcher, and Spotify. It is our pleasure and our honor to provide this information for you every single day. Now, if you think of it, we'd certainly appreciate appreciate you giving us a 5-star review over on iTunes and a little comment about why you appreciate the podcast so much. Thank you very much. We'll talk with you on the show tomorrow.